Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for listening in. I just wanted to go ahead and have a couple of guests on for a special edition episode of Meet Me for Coffee because I've started leveraging the podcast channel as a way to answer questions that I have. And Meet Me for Coffee was kind of founded on the idea of when I have questions, I ask someone if they want to sit down over coffee and talk about it. And I had some questions today. The questions are revolving around the SSC, which was the consortium that was made to talk about standardizing scheduling with APIs in the transportation space. And this was actually announced quite a while ago. That part isn't new news, but what is becoming new news is now the updates that the companies who are a part of that are releasing on the progress that they've made with this. And so now I'm seeing a lot more chatter in the LinkedIn space around this. And it comes at a time that I think our industry is really starting to lean into automation and trying to figure out how can we reduce our costs as things have been tight in a lower freight market. And so I just felt that this would be really timely information to better understand for any brokers, carriers, and shippers in the marketplace right now who are wondering how this will impact their operations and how it can hopefully be something that they can take advantage of in improving their operations. So I can't talk a whole lot about this because I don't know a whole lot about it, but I've brought on a couple of people today to the show who I think do know a lot about that. And I want to go ahead and bring in Dima and Chad, let them introduce themselves today, and we'll get to talking a little bit more about this. So guys, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Well, Dima, if you want to start with a quick introduction, and then we'll have Chad do the same. And then I have some questions for you guys, and I'm going to let you guys carry this conversation, like I said.
I'm Dima. I'm the founder of Bigger Picture. We're a scheduling automation platform, and we're here to talk automation.
Awesome.
Perfect. My name is Chad Olison. I'm the CEO of a company called AVRL. We're an automation company for about 60% of the top 100 3PLs and carriers, typically focused in the pricing side. However, dabble a little bit in the appointment scheduling side as well.
Okay. So you guys both said automation in your introductions there, obviously, which is why you guys are here today to talk more about this. You've been both already building and playing in the space of automation technology within transportation for some time. And so my first question, just to make sure I fully understand this, Dima, I'll go ahead and direct this one to you. What is the SSC? Like why was this created? What was the intent and who was a part of that? And then where has that kind of taken us?
So the SSC was established from some leaders who have led digital transformation, JB Hunt, Uber Freight, and Convoy at the time. Okay. And the intention was really taking, the learnings that they had from establishing pricing APIs, where they led that effort working with shipper TMS platforms, and really how complex it actually became. That they're still working on these integrations across all the different various platforms. So while scheduling was very important, they wanted to approach it differently and standardize that process to reduce kind of like the inconsistencies across partners. The consortium now is made up of many large enterprise carriers and brokers, as well as the tech platforms used by shippers, so TMSs, scheduling platforms, et cetera. And they've come together and worked on what that standardization should look like. How did their core technologies speak to one another? And now they've started to release, the API standard's been released, and we're starting to see companies on the shipper side releasing that connectivity.
Okay. So I think what you're kind of saying is like we did this with the API pricing, but we failed to standardize anything. And so we tried to kind of say, hey, we're going to learn from our mistakes. And when we do this for the second time with scheduling, we're going to create this standardization. I'm curious though, this may be a question for either of you. What does this mean when we say we're standardizing it? Is that like an API that we're standardizing, but then is everybody going to kind of maybe interact with that differently? Or I'm just curious how helps someone simple-minded like me in this area understand if we standardize an API, why is, like you said, Convoy, JB Hunt, Oracle, why are all these players not just releasing the same exact thing then? Why is it vary from company to company, or are they releasing the same thing?
I think we're going to see variations. It's not as standard as it sounds, but there are some key fundamental pieces that will be standardized. So what does it mean to request or like ping an order with a PO? Being able to say it's a pickup or a delivery. It is scheduled. It's not scheduled. They're very like fundamental basics in this API of what is typically exchanged when requesting an appointment and actually confirming an appointment. So it is, I think there's a lot more complexity behind the scenes, but the main basic part of what is required to request, book, and exchange information is what they've standardized in that API.
Okay. So this isn't new, right? Like the SSC was announced a while ago, but like I said, I've been seeing some more recent releases or conversations around it. Dima, you and I actually met at Manifest, and I believe around the time it was like at Manifest that Uber was making an announcement that they'd been implementing their scheduling API and using that. So how has the industry responded to this, to the initial announcement of the SSC over the last couple of years? What's been done and who's kind of stepped up in this space, and what's changed, I guess, so far?
Not a lot has changed so far. We did see the shipper platforms actually step up and take action to implement this, which is a big deal, right? It has to mean enough for their customers to want to take that step forward.
Right.
What we haven't seen, though, is the carrier transportation side actually making the necessary changes to even consume these APIs. It's like less than 1% of the market on the carrier broker side have made those changes to even manage any form of real-time scheduling or consumption of real-time appointment availability.
Okay.
I want to add something in on this. I think, if you want to automate appointment scheduling in general, you have to be able to expose an API into your TMS if you're a carrier or a 3PL. You then have to have logic based off of facilities. And I promise you, if you went and looked at every single carrier in the country or 3PL in the country, they don't even have facility codes that match what would match in the shipper system. And so if the shipper standardizes it something, or if we're going to use the standardized API, that language also has to be standardized. And so I actually think that there's a lot of pre-work that companies need to be working on before that this should even be a topic.
Okay. So when we're talking about this right now in the context of the consortium, Dima mentioned like the top 1%. So we're seeing obviously big names in this space that are talking about releases or what they're doing. And so maybe from what I've kind of gathered just from this little bit of commentary, these larger players are saying, hey, we have this capability, we have created this access, but a large majority of the respondents are going to say we don't have the ability to actually like engage with what you've created. Would that be pretty accurate? I
think they wouldn't even know that they don't have the ability to engage because they haven't even tried it yet. Sorry, Dima, I don't know if you have anything to add, but then my other comment would be even some of the, that top percent who's advertising or marketing, like, yeah, we're automating appointment scheduling, like that could be for a singular facility for a singular customer. And I think that sometimes we let marketing lead us to something versus like going in and looking at the data. And if you actually went and looked at the appointments being scheduled from these larger players, it's not this like massive footprint that they're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can agree with that. We are still seeing, even on some of the APIs that have been released, like OTM is a great example. It is customized, even though the API is there. One, the shipper has to opt in, change their workflow to be able to do the API. And then each customer is a separate API integration. So it may sound like, okay, we've got large players, but how is that large technology partner actually structured for those APIs and what's actually going to be the lift? Some are better to work with than others in terms of the way that they've structured their system and processes.
So even if you were like a broker or a carrier who because in my mind, obviously I come from this side, I've always been on the brokerage side of the industry. I think scheduling automation is amazing. Like if we could reduce the time spent scheduling appointments in a brokerage, by 70, 90%, whatever that is, that's something that I would absolutely want to, if I was a leader in an operational side of a brokerage right now, engage in. Mm-hmm. And so are the challenges, what are the challenges that they would face? Let's say they have clients right now who use, like an Oracle system, or they use a E2 Open system. And so while these companies are offering these options now, does it become difficult for that carrier or that broker to engage with those various processes, or is it fairly standardized for them to be able to plug in?
I mean, I think that's the whole point of what DEMA is trying to do in our company, right? DEMA is to provide the access to do it, because I don't know if these 3PLs and carriers could do it by themselves. Or many of them couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, we already see the effect of real-time pricing, right? Whether it's RPA or API, the backlog of those integrations is still significant. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about, all right, let's say we get all the real-time pricing done, because that's a priority. That's a revenue-generating activity versus a cost center. Sure. You look at what's coming next in APIs or integrations to these platforms. Again, if you want to connect to multiple customers onto OTM, it's not a single integration, it's multiple integrations. So I think there's a concern about bandwidth, capabilities of actually having a team to implement it, the time it's going to take. And then the second piece is actually maintaining it. So whatever that connection point is, and we've seen and we've talked to many large enterprise providers who've built their own solution, RPA, automation, et cetera. And they're like, we're done. We have not maintained it. It's so rigid. We don't want to continue to invest in doing this. We would rather work with somebody who's like, that's their core. They're going to do it. And we can, use that connection point to get to where we want to be from an automation perspective. So I see it to be, very hard for anybody downstream, like other than the largest enterprise willing to invest, to be able to access this automation or connection to these providers.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'd like to add is, when we look at automation, regardless of use case, there's an entire change management piece that goes with it. And I think that a lot of 3PLs and carriers don't know how to implement change management. I think that there are some that are very good at it. And I think that there are some who haven't tried it before. And if the CSR just doesn't want to adopt the tech, then okay, we're just we might have bought it, but we're just not going to implement it properly. And I think there's the implementation piece, but think about scheduling an appointment with a drop into Campbell's Soup or a pick into Campbell's Soup. Each facility might be for a specific commodity. Well, are your employees actually typing that commodity into your TMS and tracking it? If not, how do you know which appointment, which facility to schedule? Because the logic is a lot more complex than people think. Yeah. And the logic can only be as good as the data that's in your TMS.
Yeah.
Dima's laughing because she's gone through this.
I mean, it's so true. I've been at this scheduling thing since I was at Uber, actually, trying to figure out how do we get there. And it's so nuanced, because you're talking about inbound versus outbound, customer base, routing versus regional, where is it coming from? Not necessarily the customer, but region did it come in from? There's so many rules around what routes you to the right appointment. And I think what's unique about us is we actually started in the warehouse side, building a dock scheduler, really understanding why are these rules in place? What does it mean to the warehouse? So we've built the logic actually from the transportation side to see, why are you selecting the route you're selecting? What is unique about that path? And then how do we apply that to the next time? So we have this actual intelligence layer that sits on top that is capturing the user's behavior and learning from it, so that the next person that comes in actually already has the table set for them. They're not having to send that email or Slack to the team being like, does anyone know how to schedule at this location? Does anyone have a point of contact? What do I need to do? Our system continues to get smarter as we work with, multiple parties in a company or different shipments and different parameters to I don't want to say standardize it, because it's not a standard, to be dynamic in the sense of what the right approach is to schedule those particular orders.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing, the standardization of something's interesting. In theory, it's great. But if you were to, let's say you had to perform a ton of drops into Walmart, how many Walmart facilities there are? maybe 60% of them are the same. And then what the other 500,000 are different. Like that's a really complex problem to solve. And so I think when you look at like a company trying to do that by themselves, I don't know if the CSRs know exactly why they schedule into this location the way that they do. I think that it's a lot of guessing. And so I think when you look at like the standardization, it's like, yeah, we might have to start with an API, but I think each company has to internally think like, this is how we standardize our own scheduling of freight based off of strategy.
Yeah, it's a lot of tribal knowledge, right? Like if you look at scheduling structures, it's like you have teams that are dedicated to specific accounts, and that's because they understand them. And you're like, why did you schedule it like that? That's how I schedule it. Like, I just know that they do this, 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 and that's why I do that. The minute that person's gone, so is all that information one. Mm-hmm. But the other piece is what I think is interesting was what you're saying. Structure or standardization to some degree makes sense. But I got feedback from a company, and they're like, we put so many rules, like strict rules on each location and why we do the things we do. But then like things changed, and like nobody went back and fixed it. Nobody went back and updated it. And now our system is so rigid and nothing makes sense that adoption's out the door. Yeah. So it's like, how do you do it in a thoughtful way where you're applying parameters, but it's flexible and it continues to learn from what's happening in the ecosystem, what's happening at that facility, what's changing to continue to get better versus find yourself stuck, in saying, well, this one just doesn't work. I'm just not going to use it because it doesn't make sense to me anymore.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting topic like in itself, and probably would like warrant another discussion. But like what happens if a shipper is on E2 Open today and you've automated appointment scheduling, and then tomorrow they leave and go to a new TMS, which when we look at automated pricing, that happens so constantly. You might even have a shipper who uses this TMS, but they do all of their quoting here. And I think what ends up happening when we look at like the way that the industry grows is we see more and more fragmentation the deeper and deeper that we get into this. And I think that that's a problem in itself that will exist and persist in the industry.
I think I'm going to jump in and add something here. And you guys have kind of answered some of my questions for me just listening. So this has been great. But like what you just said there at the end, Chad, about the fragmentation, I think that unfortunately, I think progress in our industry from a technological standpoint looks like increased fragmentation. Because I think it looks like giving every party more options to do what works best for them quickly and simply. And so I think that's kind of, from my understanding of AVRL, you guys were very early on the scene in the dynamic pricing space. I think that's what you guys did. You said, hey, we're going to give you the flexibility to make quick changes, to do this and adjust and pivot without having to try to find a way to in-house all of this knowledge, all of this understanding, and all of the execution piece. And so I think what we've seen, kind of what Dima touched on earlier, is these top 1% companies have in-housed it themselves originally because, well, they had the resources to do it. I'm assuming that that's what they figured. And struggled with that. And maybe we saw that on the pricing side as well, but now I think we're certainly going to see it on the scheduling side. And so I think that you guys are, I'm seeing a lot of similarities here in like the opportunities to serve the spaces where you're saying we provide the ability to you, broker, carrier, or even shipper to be able to take advantage of the latest technology without having to take this on internally and find someone with the knowledge and the know-how of a whole team of engineers and experts that you guys are housing behind your companies. Is that pretty accurate?
What's interesting with that is that I think, you have integrators in the space that will come in and connect disparate systems together. And then you have product companies that do integration. And when we look at what we were asked by someone who's leading this consortium to come in and help them implement their automated bidding strategy. It was my very first customer. It was my purview into this space. And literally appointment scheduling was the next thing that they had asked us to do. But as we keep going deeper and deeper into this, if I look at quoting specifically, you might have a shipper who has a spot portal, an API that's asynchronous, one that's synchronous for a different set of grouping. And then they still send emails out because what they're trying to do is, where do I get the best rate from? And I've talked to people like Monster Energy, and they're like, I won't use the APIs for these carriers because I get better rates via email. Because there's always that one kid who doesn't realize that it's a drop into a CNS location with 2-hour nighttime delivery. They'll never get an appointment, but the kid thinks he got just like a great rate on it, right? And like that's like a real thing. And so I think that as we look at automation and we look at connectivity, like we have to be responding to the shipper. And when I look at like challenges with the consortium, I'm like, until the shippers are the ones pushing the consortium, how do we really gain the traction that we need?
I just said something the other day. I was talking with one of my clients, and I said, at the end of the day, shippers kind of drive this market. I mean, they're the ones with the freight that's sustaining the brokers and the carriers. And naturally, a lot of the shippers that carry a lot of that freight are large scale, publicly traded entities with responsibilities to stakeholders, with budgets to keep, with different things that take precedence at different times and different years. And I've said the same thing around electric vehicles and ESG initiatives for a long time. Like, so I don't expect to see brokers and carriers making these costly, like investments in moving that direction if the shippers aren't rewarding that with increased rates to help them offset that. And if they're not doing the same on their end, and some are, I'm not going to sit here and hate on ESG by any means or electric vehicles, but I'm saying I think everything is kind of followed suit with that. So whatever the shippers decide is worthwhile and works for them, then is passed to the carriers and the brokers to be able to adopt and invest in and lean into. But what I find interesting is what makes sense for brokers and carriers sometimes might not mean that the shipper is adopting it. We might not have shippers go full blown, I'm going to automate all of my processes with scheduling automation, or we're not going to go fully with API rating dynamics. And usually those have to be driven through their TMS, right? So if they're going to go into that partnership with their TMS. But then you have companies like Bigger Picture and AVRL who can actually say, we're focused on helping brokers and carriers optimize their internal operations, regardless of how your shipper clients are investing in similar technologies. And so your focus is more on improving the day-to-day operations and profitability of that broker and carrier to meet like their processes. And it's not now just about like meeting the shipper's processes. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I love this, where I think I see increased fragmentation almost as a necessity, because every broker and carrier now is able to start making decisions for what works best for our business to be able to be as profitable as possible, as optimized as possible. And then partnering with a technology company that allows them to do your thing and then still make sure the information gets where it needs to be within your shipper partners' systems.
Yeah. I have 2 comments. I don't know, Dima, if you have comments, but like one, the cycle that we're in right now, like capacity's been loose for a little while. You might have a procurement manager who's never seen the other side of the cycle when it's tight. Mm-hmm. And so they might flip the switch on technology as soon as capacity starts to tighten. I don't know. I assume that will happen. I think the other like comment that I just wanted to make was just like, if capacity tightens the way that we all expect that it will, appointment scheduling is not cost reduction. It's a yield play completely, and it flips. But what it does is it also creates a massive different barrier for new entrant 3PLs and carriers to come into the space. And I think that's something that the industry is not talking about. It's like, COVID happened. Technology came in. A lot of that technology is getting like ripped out because it ended up increasing cost to serve too high. And the technology that stays is going to become more and more powerful and bigger and bigger and bigger with those companies. But then like, what are you going to come in and work with the shipper when everyone's on an API and you can't even afford to do the API connectivity? Mm-hmm. You don't have a pricing engine now, or you want to do appointment scheduling, but you don't even have like a TMS, so you couldn't do it. It's like there's a lot of challenges and knock-on effects to the progression of this type of technology entering the space.
I don't think that would be entirely a bad thing if it became a little bit more difficult for brokers to grow. But yes, I agree. I agree with all of those thoughts. It becomes harder to compete against companies too, not just not just are you able to get in with that shipper, but say you even are able to, and they're leveraging technologies that ultimately allow them to operate more at a lower cost than what you can operate at, then they're able to price more aggressively and price you out of the market. And so when they need to, and so I think that you're right. I think the companies who are early adopters to technology from the broker carrier side, it will pay dividends. Probably there's some immediate ROI, but especially in the future, when you're well established in your processes and when this market does change, if you're able to handle more volumes at the same headcount, if you're able to operate just more efficiently, I think that's going to be a big differentiator in who stays and who gets removed from the market when things change.
I mean, if you take appointment scheduling specifically, let's say that the market were to tighten and same day freight rates just massively like increase. What if you could never get a same day appointment again because someone was getting it the moment that their shipment was built? Like, that's terrifying.
And we are talking about that because Dima, maybe you can speak to that, but we're literally talking about, spoiler, but I saw that Dima's company just announced their partnership with E2 Open. And from what I read on that, you guys are basically saying if you're using E2 Open and you're choosing Bigger Picture as your tool there, then when those tenders come over into this, say, broker's TMS from E2 Open, it is automatically getting an appointment scheduled almost immediately through Bigger Picture instead of waiting on a CSR to work through a queue of 50 appointments for the day. And so you're going to be beating everyone to it who has to wait for that CSR to manually get to pick over the leftovers of those appointment slots. And we all know there's a big difference in appointment times when it comes to like a 3 a.m. versus an 8 a.m. versus a 2 p.m. delivery, like depending on what your transits are. And so Bigger Picture is able to say, we understand what the ideal optimal time is for you in this instance, and we auto book it. That was my understanding. Dima, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's okay.
The goal is, with that connectivity is to be able to immediately secure appointments, whether it's same day or even further out, because you'll find the closer you get to that pickup date, the fewer optimal appointments are available. And when you're looking at a CSR today, they're prioritizing by like what has to ship the soonest, not like I need to schedule this 2 weeks out because if I don't, I'm not going to have that appointment. They're not thinking that far ahead. So being able to schedule as soon as you can, whether it's, let's say it's tendered before they even open up scheduling, but to be able, as soon as those appointments open up, secure that, you have a higher likelihood of getting an optimal appointment and better margins on that order than if you were to wait and have a less optimal time. Those 3 a.m.s, brutal, right? And there are a lot of companies that are just not quick enough to get ahead of it, even though they've had the order in their possession to secure those better times.
Oh, I like this conversation because now we're really talking about like competitive advantages for brokers and carriers too.
Exactly. I just wanted to for me, being focused heavily into pricing as well. You can't post a load into the market until an appointment's scheduled. And so if you literally can have it auto scheduled and then you're into the market before everyone else as well, you have massive pricing competitive advantages as well. It's a full yield play at that point.
Yeah. So if we're saying we're running an example with both of what you guys do, you auto price something based on algorithms that work for your business. You're tendered a load. The load automatically schedules itself, and then it's pushing your TMS to your carrier teams you could not ask for more lead time for those carrier teams if both of those processes were automated, right? And so then you have carrier teams who can go out and have the best chance that they would ever have at securing the best rate in that model. And then we don't have anyone on the call from companies like this today, but I know there's also capacity tools that are coming out to auto match capacity with people in your systems with rates on file. So that's where we start getting to this conversation of what Dima, I'm sure you heard at Uber early on, is the fully automated shipment, right? And I think Convoy is trying to resurface and Flexport with a similar idea. But I think that what I find so cool is when we first thought about the fully automated shipment, and maybe Uber discussed that, they envisioned themselves providing all of that. And they're a top 1%. So maybe that's possible. But now we can talk about any size broker or carrier having a fully automated shipment as long as they're willing to partner with companies who are experts in each of those process flows. And that's where I say maybe fragmentation is a good thing, right? If it means diverse partnerships or letting people be their subject matter experts in what it is that their team does well.
the company, like we work with a ton of top 3PLs, which means that when we come in and deploy a process, we've like literally taken the best of what we think is the best from a grouping of them to implement a piece of technology that we like, this is best for the environment, not from like a singular 3PL. And that's what ends up happening when someone builds something themselves is they're like, this is how we do this here. It's not like this is how the top 10 does it, the top 25 does it, smash it together and pick the best pieces.
Yeah, and I actually agree with that, right? Like having the expertise and the visibility to what's happening across providers and looking at the variations of how they do things, right? And piecing that together as, you know, your pricing piece, but even understanding the depth beyond what your internal network as a carrier is versus like what's happening in the ecosystem around you, not just its other carriers, but you know, you are only hauling a percentage of what's happening in the network. So that information is limited. When you're looking at being able to use somebody or a tool that has more of that ecosystem built in, information, data, understanding beyond what your network is, that's where those companies are going to get more value out of a product rather than building in-house. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that now. You know, more companies are saying, I built it. I don't want to keep maintaining it. You know, like we have other things we now need to make initiatives with. Is this my differentiator? You know, where do I want to invest? What's going to make me different? Is it this, or is it going to be, you know, something more unique to our value?
I think if you also look at like those business add-ins or the bolt-ins, I don't believe that TMS goes after spaces like this. I think that TMS starts to fully integrate products like this into their TMS and sells it as their own. And so I actually think that like what the future of transportation management looks like is like, you might buy automated deployment scheduling from a TMS, but they might not have been the ones who built it or deployed it. It might just be white labeled back to the TMS.
Absolutely.
It's the TMS marketplaces. You know, it is a growing ecosystem in those marketplaces of being able to pick what solutions they want to add onto it, right? I really think even the marketplaces came with the Ubers and the Convoys and like the initial push of APIs and that ease of connectivity into the TMSs. So I think like pricing and appointment scheduling would make sense as a marketplace solution for TMS providers. Like focus on the TMS and what you do there. Let those that can, you know, add value, whether it's like labeled or what have you, bring that to your marketplace.
Okay. You guys are fantastic, and somehow we're already at 32 minutes. So I have to ask this question then to kind of wrap this up, and this has been really helpful for me. I'm really hoping that other people get a lot of value out of this. But maybe this is the first time that there's a leader or an operations professional at a brokerage or a carrier who's understanding that scheduling automation or maybe even pricing automation isn't just for the top 1 to 10% of the players in our space. And so what are their options? Like what can a broker or a carrier or even a shipper, right? Dima, you guys work on the shipper side. What can somebody do right now if they're interested in like exploring what this means? And I think really I want to ask, obviously they can reach out to you, they can have a conversation, right? But what are the barriers to this is what I really want to ask more. Is it complex? Is it complicated? Do they need a robust IT department? Like, what does it look like for someone to be able to start leveraging? Actually, both. I'll let you both answer this, like scheduling automation. And Chad, I know your company plays a role in this as well, too.
For us, we do a lot of the heavy lifting on the integration piece with the providers on the shipper side, portals, et cetera. But we wanted to make this accessible for any size carrier, whether you are the large enterprise and you want a full API integration directly into your TMS, or you are operating on a TMS that you have no control over code, product changes, et cetera. So we've actually have 3 different ways to get access to bigger pictures, integrations, and automation. One that's absolutely no tech involved, where you can get up and running in same day, and all the way to a full API integration where we're really just working between the systems and providing that service.
For me, we operate the same. I think, when we came into the space, we were working with like the top 10 3PLs, and they had their own analytics teams and their own data science teams and their own infrastructure teams. We have a second company at AVRL called Company B, where we'll actually come in and set up their infrastructure for them so that we can do the integration, and we go end to end almost internally ourselves to work with mid-market players. Yep.
Very cool. Okay. Well, this has been awesome, you guys. Thank you so much for talking about this. And I mean, I guess, what do you guys think as far as, did we we've learned something from like the pricing side? And do we think, I would imagine, honestly, that I remember when API pricing came out, I was actually working at ArcBest ABF Freight. And so dynamic pricing that we rolled out in the LTL space, we had to I had 30-minute conversations with people regularly explaining like what the concept of that was on the shipper side and to other, colleagues. So like this has been around for a while on the dynamic pricing side. Do we think that has kind of, I want to say like created an appetite for scheduling automation to maybe be like quicker received to market? Chad's shaking his head no.
I think what it did was a lot of the TMS providers on the shipper side charge the shipper and they charge the carrier and the 3PL. And I think that a lot of people are really turned off by APIs. And I think that's negative. However, they need to understand that the larger players are doing it. And so, yeah, is it like not great that they're charging? Yeah, it's not great. However, look at pricing. You can't access an entire shipper's routing guide anymore if you're not using their API. And so I think what will end up happening is more fragmentation, like we discussed. But I think you almost have to get to this point where like we have to do this to continue to be like at the forefront of the industry or competitive in this space.
Okay. Well, for anyone who is listening in, Dima, Chad, they are both on LinkedIn. I'm sure they are very open to connection requests and messages. I see them both on there pretty regularly. So they are active. Feel free to reach out to them. I'll offer myself as a resource. You obviously heard the extent of my understanding of this concept, but if you want to pick my brain and ask me for an introduction or any questions, I'm happy to help where I can. And thank you so much for everyone who is able to listen to this special edition. Thank you, Dima. Thank you, Chad, for coming on. And it was great to meet you guys both for coffee.
Hey, I'm the only one that drank coffee, by the way. I was watching.
I don't even have any yet. I chugged that at like 6 a.m., so it's been gone.
I have to drink it fast enough before my kids wake up. Otherwise, it's quickly forget about it.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on.
Appreciate it. Thank you.